welcome back to the Realm of Unpopular Opinions. It has been months. And why has it been months? Because June was exam month and July was official recovery month. So I went for a trip for about 16 days in July. Did I just say June twice? July. And I got back about a week and a half ago, and I've been recovering from that. I've been recovering from recovering. Basically, that's what the clips in the beginning will be in a couple of the next videos, because I think the footage is very nice and relaxing and probably very sad to look at for me in particular, but it might be nice for some of you who don't have a swimmable sea near you. I will be starting my return with a wrap up, because I think wrap ups are kind of to give you a main idea of what I've been doing. It's been a lot of rereads, but it has been some new stuff, and I'm very salty about the new stuff, so that's not going to be a popular opinion. But it's all in the intro, so you're not allowed to get upset with me. I already said this is unpopular. So let's get into the wrap up. This is for June and July. I've been reading a bit more in August, so let's hope that wrap up is a bit more interesting. But let's go June and July, and then the next couple of videos will be a bit more interesting in my opinion. This is more of a catch-up. These books I do not have, so I'm putting them there. This is called the Traces series, if I'm not mistaken. Now, this is part of the 2 books that I remember from my childhood. I used to go to the library a lot, and I read 5 parts of the Traces series translated, and I loved them. I read them so many times, and it just stuck with me. That and one other series. They just stuck with me. But for years, I had no idea what they were called in English, and I couldn't find them. And then recently, I did some very, very interesting sleuthing online, and I found them. And they are as great as I remember. This is not middle grade. It's a little bit grim to be a middle grade. It's like a young adult mystery series about a detective who solves crimes with his robot sidekick, I guess. And I loved it. I was so surprised by how much I loved it, because it grips your attention, and it's very clever but also very simple. It's not like you're gonna have to rack your brains to figure out how in the hell they solved it. It's all very clear, but it's interesting enough and mysterious enough that you're like, okay, I'm enjoying every page of this, and it's not too long, and it's very simplistically satisfying in a way. Now, the second mystery was a bit more underwhelming, because it's like a religious cult. That's always a bit underwhelming unless you dive deep into it, but I loved the first book. It was so much fun. And the third book is one of my favorite concepts ever. I just haven't read it yet. So I read the first 2 books. I think I'm going to put up just the first one, or maybe both. Okay, so the first one was Framed, the second one was Lost Bullet. I gave Framed 5 stars and Lost Bullet 4 stars. I haven't started book 3 yet, but it's a really fun series. Yes, it's a bit naive, it's a dystopian society and stuff. The romance is in particular very, very not developed, but I mean, that's kind of the point about young adult mysteries. But the concept of a mystery that isn't that harsh in the gruesome stuff, just like modern mysteries, for example, modern thrillers are often very medical and very gory and very gross. This is engaging and fun while not being gross. So I loved the mystery, and this in particular definitely still holds up the way I remember it. Let us keep going. Next up, we have Lords of the Sith. Now, I've been very chaotic with reading the Star Wars books, because I kind of read them as I fall into the mood, which, to be fair, isn't that often because I feel like I fall in and out of the Star Wars mood. But Lords of the Sith was the last book I needed to read that wasn't mine. That was actually borrowed from my dad's friend. So I had to give it back to him, and I forced myself to read it. I almost wish I hadn't forced myself to read it, because this was the worst. This was absolutely the worst. I think I gave it 2 stars, but that was 1.5. I'm being very generous, because it wasn't a 1 star. 1 star is reserved for the books that I physically cannot stand the sight of. This wasn't that. It was just disappointing. But again, it's Disney era Star Wars, so it's not that shocking, really. And why I hated it, I feel like I'm skirting around the issue quite a bit, is it was really, really leaning into the evil of it, which obviously, yes, Sidious and Vader at their peak of the Empire were heinous, and that all stands, but that doesn't mean that I need a book about them. Like, I don't need an entire book about the two of them running around and killing people. It's not that fun. It's not fun. It's not constructive. Like, there's a reason why George never leans into the dark stuff. He leans into the tragedy, like in the prequels, but he never leans into the like dark stuff. Yeah, by the way, let's have like a whole half an hour where Sidious goes around killing people. Like, that's not the point. So the point of this entire book was for me to probably be like, oh my god, look how badass Sidious and Vader are, which they are, but we already know that. I didn't need them slaughtering a random, very nice village for character development that I already know they go through. It was essentially pointless, and it feels like it's glorifying it in a way because it looks cool. Like, you know that if they filmed this, it would look pretty cool, just like what Vader does in Obi-Wan Kenobi. It would look cool, but it's, you kind of have to wonder, do you really need a whole book that's almost 400 pages long just about murderers without any development? Like, nothing new really is learned here. They're just leaning into the Sith are really scary. We knew this. Next up, I finished Anne of the Island, finally. Apparently all of the Anne rereads are like months long because I'm just that kind of reader. But that is besides the point. My review for this shouldn't even be a review because it's a reread, so I'm going to wrap it up quickly. But this is where the series ends. This is the conclusion. It ends with her and Gilbert walking off into the sunset. This is it. Let's not even discuss anything that comes after it. These are my ultimate comfort reads. I love them. This is divine, and this is where it ends. That's all you need to know. All you need to know, because every single vibe that you thought this series represented is gone after this. The next book wasn't even readable, and the one after that was an embarrassment. So Anne of the Island is where the Anne of Green Gables series wraps up. Now that's it. Next up, we have, I started reading the Dragonero comics, which was 1 through 9, I believe. I'll just put up a random one. It was 1 through 9, I think. Maybe 1 through 8. Irrelevant. But this is a high fantasy comic series, which is very interesting because they never really dive into it that deeply. It's about a group of fantasy creatures, people with abilities, whatever else, traveling and solving crimes. I guess it's sort of like The Witcher meets How to Train Your Dragon. I don't know how to explain it differently. It's Italian anyway, so I'm not sure if it's been translated into English. But it's real good. It's so fun while still being kind of like serious in a way. It has actual messages and actual things that they're trying to tell a story about without being too much fun, but it is still very, very entertaining, and their dynamics are entertaining. I think there's like a whole episode where they're just sitting around and talking, and I think I might have actually liked that one the best because they are just a pleasure to listen to and to explore as people or creatures, and their dynamics are very unique in their own ways. I think the orc is my favorite. Definitely my favorite. So if you do read it and you know who he is, that's my favorite character. I don't know what else to say about this because giving summaries I don't love doing, but I don't have much else to say about it. It's like The Witcher. It's like The Witcher with dragons. I mean, Witcher has dragons too, but this has more dragons than The Witcher, but it's essentially kind of like The Witcher. So if you've read those books, you might actually enjoy this. But it is very high fantasy. Like, there's a lot of species and places and names and concepts that I have not even grasped yet. So that's something to note. Moving into July, I pretty much read manga. That was it. That was it. Because for half of July, I was away and I don't read much while I'm away. So I read the first omnibus, I guess, of the Uramichi manga because I'd only started reading where the show leaves off, so I never actually read this beginning. I mean, it's pretty much like the show. There's just some extra stuff here and there. I loved it, and I plan to collect the other two omnibuses. This is one of my favorite comfort things ever, for sure, and it's lovely. It's absolutely lovely, and so heartwarming while also being very oddly relatable. Then I reread the entirety of Tokyo Ghoul. I read it last year in like April, so it's been quite a while, and I loved it. I don't think I need to say that. It's my favorite manga ever. So it's not that complex of a review. I don't have much to say that I haven't already said. I will just say I don't think I've ever, in manga at least, experienced an author that cares that much about every single character. Like every single character will return, will have their role to play, will be good or bad. Like everyone in this part of the story comes back and has something to do. He added a whole new cast of characters and the old ones still had something to do. That takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to actually remember every single side character and give them a job to do. He didn't have to plan it out from the beginning, but if you're able to make a story where I almost think you planned every move from the beginning, that's definitely definitely commendable, and not a lot of people do it. Not just in manga, in books too. So this is like the one thing that I will say, I am not a big shipper. I'm really not. I tend to focus on characters rather than ships, especially if it's not the point of the series to be a shipper, like Jane Eyre. Obviously, the whole point is the two of them. But I loved Ayato and Hinami a lot last time. This time, I felt like I was insanely in love with the concept of the two of them. Every time that they showed up on page, I was checking if they were next to each other or together or anything like that. I'm a bit of a shipper at this point, and I have to admit that. There's the book with the chapter about them that I read. It was very poorly translated. I will get it and try and translate it myself. But consider me a shipper at this point, which I do not say very often, especially because I don't read romance books. So we will get to that, by the way, in the August wrap up. Now, the last thing that I read in July, and pretty much the only thing that I read while I was on my trip, Watchmen. I just downloaded the PDF like very randomly when I was on the beach, and I was like, yeah, let's read it. I don't know why. Graphic novels and comics and manga and any kind of stuff like that, it's very summer for me because I do not have the attention span to care about the scorching heat and also track like 50 different points of view and 13 different plot lines. I do not have the capacity for that in the summer, so it's a lot of comics and a lot of manga and a lot of graphic novels. And for some reason, Alan Moore always comes up for me July to September. Like every year that I read him, and it's been like 3 years at this point, I think, maybe even more. I think it's 3 years. Every time I read it, it's like the second half of summer. Watchmen just comes comes into my brain like a software download around August. This was around the end of July, so close enough. I'm still waiting for the need to read Vendetta again to kick in because it's been a while for that too. But just assume that I'm going to read Watchmen every summer. I love it. It's definitely one of my favorite graphic novels of all time. I prefer Vendetta, but Watchmen has a very special place in my heart because it's superheroes, which is essentially a genre that I have a lot of resentment towards, and he single-handedly cured it. So That's why I appreciate Watchmen actually quite a bit, because I don't feel like gagging every time that they mention superheroes. Now, I don't have anything new to add to the discussion of this. I think I've talked about it more than enough. Is it a summary read? No, not really. There's a lot of snow and rain, and it's not really a summary read, but I don't know what it is. Summer is Alan Moore time for me, so that's all that I will say. It took me like a couple of days. I'd pick up the PDF while I was on the beach or before bed and stuff, so it took me a couple of days. Aside from that, didn't read a single thing while I was down there. Wraps up my video, which has been a lot shorter than I thought it would be, but that's because I was checking Goodreads to see what else I needed to talk about, and a lot of the stuff that I really want to talk about is in August's wrap up, so obviously August isn't over yet. So not that much in June and July. I also read like a couple more books that are like art books or art of a movie and stuff like that. I'm not going to talk about it because it's weird. I didn't read it necessarily, so I don't really mention it, but it was the art of Princess Mononoke, and it was the art of Tokyo Ghoul. I reread that one because it's my favorite, because there's like an interview at the end with him that I really love reading. He's a lot of fun as an author. That's it for August. That's it for the wrap up. It feels very pathetic to film about books when you don't read that much. I think everyone who has ever filmed about books feels that way. There's people who casually just make videos and they've read like 3 books a month. That's weird for me personally, because I usually read a lot more. Like as soon as it hits September, I feel like my reading schedule jumps up to new heights, because I read a whole lot more in the fall and in the winter, because I am not a warm weather person. I hate it. If it could rain every day, I would be as happy as the happiest person in the world. So this is the worst for me. I live in the Mediterranean. It does not suit my tastes, and my reading sucks when it's hot. So I have nothing else to say. I hope that I actually stick to my guns and I do the videos that I wanted to do. In any other case, I'll see you next time. Let me know what you've been reading. If summer is very good for your reading, if you have a will to live, even though it's 35 to 40 where I am. But yeah, now I'm just whining. So I'll see you next time.